Thank you very much. I want to kind of put my presentation in context. I think all that has been said today in terms of the difficulties and problems with the ISA is not new. Actually, the Singapore's case has been recorded with the UN mechanism, which is called the Universal Periodic Review. 6 organizations have highlighted the problems, identifying some of the legal issues there. In 2011, during the first cycle of the UPR review, so this is a matter of public record. But what is interesting there is the first emergence of the large number of arrests of Muslims, Singaporean Muslims, linking them to terrorism activities. In fact, at that time, I think the government only reported a number about 50. It was not transparent in terms of the numbers of people arrested for this issue. In 2006, there were actually 2016, again with the Universal Periodic Review submissions. This time there were about a total of 12 NGOs, but 3 submissions, again highlighting, and this time actually in one of the submissions, I believe it was Function 8 submission, that actually pointed out that the government, Singapore government, was economical in its estimate and actually pulled out the clear numbers and pointed out it was 81. Now, this is the number that has been put out in the last couple of months over the recent announcement. But actually, based on current estimates, and these are things that we have to do our own research, and that's why a research approach to study this issue is important. Our estimate right now is 126 Muslims have been arrested under the ISA since 2001, related to some form of extremist terrorism charges. About 20 are still under detention or restriction as of today. So these are information culled out of public record. So these are hard numbers. So numbers that we can put forward to the UN and the UPR mechanism in the next cycle. So as a matter of public record, so the estimate numbers. You find the approach to talking about ISA, detainees, and so on, usually is a very statist approach. A lot of think tanks funded by government money, and we have seen this also in recent years. You have commentators coming out and identifying individuals as being extremists or radicals, putting out indicators and so on. But that's only one dimension of the story. And today we also had the very legalistic approach and analysis. But I think it's important also to look at the human dimension and what happens to those who are detained and as well as their families. And this is what I plan to do today. Part of it is also inspired by the publications F8 has put out over the recent years, documenting, although in a delayed manner, some of those experiences. And I think we need to think back also in this phenomena of arrest of Muslim. And I do call it a phenomena because you can see the shift between the threats to the Singapore state that came from communists has now moved to terrorists. And if you look at the list since 2001, it's all Muslims, whether it's Singaporeans or the last big news item, Bangladeshis. So that's something I think to think about and to ask what may be the root cause behind that. So I have had an opportunity to, this is a case study on the Zulfikar's case. I'm hoping that I can expand my research beyond just this case. I took up this case simply because it was fresh. I had access to the family, and I think it allows us to scope a parameter. And in talking to the family and related contacts, my pool of access interviewers and options to interview them looks like it'll get bigger. So, can map up a bigger story. So this is where it all happened. This is 1st of July. This is at the Tuas checkpoint. The family were crossing from Malaysia to Singapore. and they were coming over for the Hari Raya festival, so 1st July, and they were detained, right? Zulfikar and the boys. And to cut a long story short, I mean, because it's quite a powerful narrative then, we have very limited time, I'm just going to give you a quick snapshot overview of the 3 months. Zulfikar was pulled away to a different location, but his 3 eldest boys, who are aged 2019 and 18, I think their birthdays are still intact. I don't think there's much change. So this is how they were interviewed. Simultaneously in one location, as you can see. 2 interviewers, sometimes more, and they were sit around the same complex, and they were questioned for a couple of hours. They were stopped at about 7, and they were collectively as a family, because there was a lot of going back and forth. I do have detailed information, but 3.5 hours, right? The boys in particular were asked about their whole life story, and one thing that struck me, because I've seen the series of questions that they have recollected and sent on to me, was the nature of their citizenship. Because they're all below 21 and they hold dual citizenship, Singapore and Australian citizenship. 3 of the children do. And they were asked whether they will keep Singapore citizenship. So I found it very interesting, just the tone of the questioning and the focus. And it's just fascinating to read the type of questions they have asked. So that's 1st July. This is 3rd July. This is at the, by the way, these graphics were drawn by the family, by the children mostly, just to give us an indication of what is it really like inside. You can hear about this narrative, but sometimes it's good to really have a look at these pictures. So there they are. You have a coffee table, a sofa set. You can also see, I'll highlight 2 persons there, Zubaida and Madam Noor. These are liaison officers. They just manage communication with the family. They are not the case officers, who are different people. And here, they were kind of briefed as to why Zulfikar was detained for now, and essentially they told the family that the first 30-day, he's under the first 30-day order. Okay. So I will just sort of go down and show you the first timeline. So you can see from the 1st July detention at Tuas, you have the first meeting with ISD officers at Onat Road, just 2 days after. And then almost 2 weeks after, you get the first visit. The first visit was control visit. It was only for 30 minutes, and only the mother-in-law, or Zulfikar's mom, and wife were allowed to meet with him. And I will come back to this, but I think to understand, you need to understand the structure of the meetings. The meetings with Zulfikar are only for 30 minutes. The location is in Changi Prison, but we are not sure whether he's detained at the location, but that's where the visits takes place. Often the family members are reminded the visits are only for close family members, the wife, the mother, children, and siblings, nobody else. There's always pre-screening before the visit, coaching in terms of how to manage the meeting. They often try to get the family to set up questions in advance. They are advised not to upset the detainee through some, harsh exchange or deep questioning. And they are reminded, should the detainee be upset, that person will not be allowed to visit again, and they have given like past examples with other detainees. Detainee is prepared with the items he wants or messages he wants to convene to the family members. These are the standard messages the family often gets during the visit, that he's well taken care of. He can observe his religious rights, regrets his actions, always self-incriminating, repeats admissions during the visits that he is in the wrong, and promises that when he gets out, he only wants to focus on the family. Almost often during the visits, as it was narrated to me, he dissuades them from campaigning for him or making media statements. So this is a pattern, observed throughout the visits. Not many of us know, and that's why deep or action research is helpful in understanding this situation. He wears during the detention what looks like an old t-shirt, light orange, yellowish color. The family can't really see more of what he's wearing, chest down because he's seated. He never stands up. So the family enters the room, he's already sitting down waiting. Every time family members stand up to leave, he never stands up. He sits there and watches the family members leave. So you get a sense of what the 30 minutes are all about. This is how the visit takes place. Before they enter the chamber, the visit room, they are brought to an annex room, which is connected to the visit room here, as you can see the door. They are asked to, remove all bags and, phones and those kinds of things. And they are either they are sat down. The liaison officers accompanies them as far as this room is concerned before the time ticks, and they get into the room. So this is the room that is important, as you can see. It's a very small room. On one side, where Zulfikar is sitting, you have two Gurkha guards standing. You have an ISD officer sitting on one side of the room, and there's a very thick glass panel and some airways through a metal frame. So Zul, as I mentioned, is already with his old yellowish t-shirt sat down, and he doesn't move. He's already, sat down before the family comes in. So you have two chairs across. So at any one time, only two person is allowed to get into the room. You also have an officer, I think, on two sides. But what is interesting is, and this is based on the first three visits, is the door of access as indicated, and I do have to have more conversations and research to clarify this. The doors have been indicated on 3 different locations, so possibly 3 different types of room. Point to note is, and I'll read this here, the rooms were windowless and very, very small. Quite thick glass windows and barriers. We had to raise our voices a bit so that we can hear each other. So this is the visiting room, and this is at Changi Prison Complex. Again, we are not sure whether he's held there. Family thinks otherwise, that's actually brought there for the visit. And this has to be collaborated with the stories of other detainees and other families, so we have a more composite picture of the current situation and how those under detentions are managed. So I'll continue with the timeline. So so there were 2 first visits, and you can see on 15th of July and the 28th of July. These are not regularized visits because these were under the first 30 days. In fact, the family was informed that this was actually quite unusual. They don't actually permit family visits in the first 30 days, but because they were here, in Malaysia and Singapore only for the, the school holidays and Hari Raya holidays. So the family was informed. They made an exception to accommodate this visit, and so everything is timed. In the early part of the first 30 days, there was speculation within the family that this is only a period of preliminary investigation. Meetings, the first visit of the family with Zulfikar also gave them that feeling. There was first 30 days, and once all the due diligence were done, and actually they'll be off. But on the 28th, 2 days before the end of 30 days, they were informed that actually he's going to be served with a 2-year detention order, and that the news will be out the following day. So they were primed for that. And then on the 29th, you have the first reports, and you can also see in the first few days, it was thick and thin because everybody weighed in. You had the media, just from the state narrative. You have commentators, analyzing the situation from a statist point of view. And then you had people who had possibly, had a difference of opinion, also weighing in and, critiquing him and, insisting he was an extremist, and all the other unkind remarks that follows on Facebook posts. So you had a lot of that, and I think that, traumatized the family quite a bit, and that's why after a few days, they brought out the statement. And as soon as the statement came out, you found all the noise just stopped. There was no more expert commentators, commenting anymore. There were no more critiques with whom he crossed-road. All of that died down immediately. There was, of course, the government's reply the next day, which was quite unusual normally, because by the evening they would reply, but I think those in charge were traveling that day, so he had it come out the next day. It was a very small, short rebuttal, they insisting that, the opposition gave them the right of proof to arrest him. Then you have, then they regularized the visits. The first visit was, so their visits are on Wednesdays, right? The first visit, because of, family travel and stuff, began on a Thursday, and that was the first pre-detention visit. Since then, the visits have been continuing regularly, and in a clockwise manner, 12 o'clock every Wednesday, 30 minutes. On the 10th of August, his mother-in-law and brother-in-law. The brother-in-law was actually at first not allowed to visit in one of the visits. His application was rejected. And then later on, he was actually called for questioning for over 4 or 5 hours. The crux of the discussion is not known to me, but there was that intervention. And then you have regular visits. You will see that since the 10th of August till just a couple of days ago, it's only the mother-in-law or Zul's mother who has visited him. And on the 7th, the mother-in-law, and this is just 2 days ago, the mother-in-law and the brother-in-law went to visit, and there for the first time, Zul has asked for a lawyer because he has been informed that his review board will meet in 2 weeks, right? The family is short of cash. It is unable, it has taken advice with lawyers from Australia, but as we all know, most recommend to have a local lawyer on the ground. Zul wants a lawyer, but of course, that's the issue of money and also the willingness of lawyers to represent him, right? Since Ravi is still waiting for his certificate, so he's not able to help. So that's a real situation. So on the next day after the 8th, the wife texts the liaison officer asking whether Zul can seek help from legal aid. So we're not sure. So, but that has been the interaction. And then today we have the public seminar. So tentatively based on the information on the last visit, so we can put, his review board for the 21st September, but there's no clarity and clear information. So what have I learned from the interaction, reviewing public documents, family documentation, conversations, and online, offline communication? I've been able to form some patterns, and I observed the following thing. Firstly, the family is interacting with individuals from the state without formally verifying the identity of the people. They just take it for granted. If somebody says I'm so and so, they just kind of accept it, right? So I think that's a bit problematic. I think because of fear and just it's all very overwhelming. They have not done that. Those who interact with them may not be using their real name. We don't know. They have not identified them formally with their identity card, work identification card, and so on. They receive a lot of informal requests for very sensitive things without written correspondence. Two things sort of caught my attention. One is Zul's Australian passport. They didn't have it. He didn't have it on him. They wanted to have access to the passport. So they had to make a decision whether they want to, because they also want to show that he is an Australian citizen, to see if that was any form of advantage for them. So they also asked for all his bank and financial accounts when the family wanted some authorization. And I'll come back to the financial issue, because they wanted, because he's the breadwinner, right? And a lot of the family, bills, water bills, telephone bills, all of that is through gyro from his Australian account, and they needed to make sure there was money there and bills were paid. Otherwise, in Australia, it's quite expensive because you get a lot of interest charged up if you don't pay on time. The liaison officers communicate via text messages, but they have no authority whatsoever. So all requests has to be funneled back to the case officers. And it takes time for response and decisions to come through. In the early stages, when Zulfikar's wife and children were here during the first 30 days, they were constantly encouraged to go back and look after their business and not be here. They are reminded, if they are here, well, the state doesn't give them any financial assistance, so go back and lead your own life. The preference has always been to deal with Zulfikar's mother. Okay. So I mentioned financial, no SG government support for families of detainees. That's always told to them from very beginning, and often they are reminded of this. They are always counseled, reminded not to share or publicize information about the detention from the first time he was taken in. So consistently, this is done. For example, when the family put out the press release 3 days after they were hurting with all those negative remarks, there was a standoff between the wife and Zul in the visitation chamber over whether she should have done the press release or not. And there was some tense moment between husband and wife because he was insisting that should not go out. Yeah. And Zul continues to remind the family members not to bring up his case, talk up, create publicity or campaign on his behalf. We have evidence from exchanges between the officers, my interviews and correspondence, that Zul is being kept busy with interviews because he's still being investigated. So I think he probably has a busy schedule, and also counseling. Uh, the often in the correspondence with these officers, the term used is he's being investigated for terrorism-related issues while being detained under the ISA. So, so over the copious information, interview notes and stuff that I gathered, so I was able to kind of pull out these kinds of patterns, and I wonder, if whether it was like this in the past detentions, and really how is it affecting those people who are, arrested perhaps since 2001. So I think there might be a general pattern, and a single case study is usually a good way to start to try to validate or collaborate a larger picture. The one thing that comes up here through the notes and other information is the Terrorism Suppression of Financing Act regulations. So as a result, the family cannot access Zulfikar's account and transact on them, especially to pay bills and stuff like that. They don't need it to withdraw money because he doesn't have much money there, but really they want to use it for transaction. Because to pay the agencies, then interest and all of that accumulates, and also in Australia it's quite difficult for third party to pay an account, and all that. So they have to deal with this and find a solution. And when they interact with the case officer to facilitate, and they have facilitated with authorization letter, PIN codes, after some going back and forth. They ask, when you ask for something, they ask for a full list of his financial holdings, banks account, and so on, and they say that they need all of that in order to process the request. It also allows them to investigate and find out who has financially transacted with Zulfikar, whether people have transferred money to him, and he has difficulty, of course, financially, and I think whoever may have helped him financially in whatever ways do have risk of their financials being scrutinized, frozen, and seized, and I understand some of it has already happened. And I think those sort of, vaguely or loosely connected with him, either through communication, have also been called up for interviews and have had their jobs threatened, as in the usual manner of threats here. So some review board queries, and perhaps the colleagues here can come in. This is what the family wants to know. When is the review board expected to start? Who will be on it? What's the procedure for this? How will the process work? How long does it take? How soon can a lawyer see Zulfikar if indeed he is entitled to one and ask for one? They feel they should be briefed earlier about this, the family, but I understand from Ravi there's no provision for that timeline. And they would just want to know general things about when he was informed of this so that he has enough time to prepare and so on. Initial indication in the early visits was he wanted to represent himself, but I think since it's coming 3 months, he has changed his mind. What's the main family concern? I mean, I think like all families, their concerns are quite normal, I guess. They miss him, and they miss out the fact that they can't share important dates together, like the Eid festival or a child's birthday. They are heard about allegations on the media reports made by expert commentators or negative comments from those who have debated and crossed swords with Zul, and of course FB posts. So that's caused a lot of hurt to the family. Because of the negative family publicity, friends and family are afraid to talk to the family. Uh, they are hoping that they can somehow clear his name and things will return to normal. They do worry about him during his detention because they don't really know what goes on. And they have seen, behavioral changes throughout the visits, from being confident and gung-ho and of course deteriorating and so on. And of course difficulties in handling his personal and financial affairs. This is a quote from the wife. We are just emotionally and mentally drained out of worry and desperation, not knowing what to do or if what we could do harm him further, or family and friends in SG. Who to trust? It's not knowing what would happen. Even after 2 years, would he be released? When can we be a family again? And for them, the irony. These people who are holding someone whom they accuse of being a terrorist supporter are actually the ones causing terror in people. The impact they have had on friends and family who are scared now to do even what they know is the right thing or to speak the truth. So that's just a first sketch. It's a bit rough, but I didn't have much time to, synthesize my notes, and it's really, just one case study. But I think there's a lot of work. Why this research and all of that? As I mentioned earlier, that this is not new. It's been a practice, it's been documented. It has also, such research and synthesis has already been reported by our other colleagues from the different NGOs in the 2011 cycle, the 2016 cycle, and I expect us to continue reporting and tracking on this issue. And I guess it's just one of those things that we have to keep at it. So I'll stop here and then we can have a free exchange. Thank you very much.